Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Nairobi Health Show. Today I have Irene Lyon on the show. Irene, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dave. Great to be here.
It's great to have someone
Yeah.
from the beautiful city of Vancouver
I'm
on the
sitting right in
podcast
it.
today.
Yeah. I'm literally staring at one of the tallest buildings from where I am right now.
Living the dream. One of the most beautiful cities in the world.
I agree. I've traveled to many cities and I always like coming home and seeing that ocean and mountains. And yes.
Me too. Before I married my wife, I lived in White Rock.
Oh,
And
were you by the beach?
we were close. I actually would drive. I'd drive the dog down to the beach and we would walk along the railroad tracks and the beach every morning. And it's absolutely incredible. It's a wonderful part of the world.
Yeah, it's beautiful here.
And for those of you tuning in, Irene is a nervous system expert. So this will be interesting today. She teaches people around the world how to work with the nervous system to transform trauma, heal body and mind, and live full creative lives. To date, her online programs have reached thousands of people in over 60 countries. She has a master's degree in Biomedical and Health Science and a knack for making complex info easy for all of us, which is fantastic because when it comes to the nervous system, I think we need that. Simplicity.
Yes. Simplicity and not leaving out the complexity at the same time.
Okay, so just jump right on in and tell us all about the simple system that we have in our bodies.
Where shall I start? Should I start giving just like a little science lesson on what our nervous system is and what it does?
We should start right there because it's a common word. We hear it all the time. But I bet there'd be some epiphanies for all of us, myself included, if you were to just do the fifth grade version of the nervous system, maybe.
So I'll talk. I mean, I know this is audio, but if someone has a paper and pen, sometimes it's good to jot this down. But there are many nervous systems. So we say nervous system, and yet we have to understand that there's multiple ones. So the two main ones, one is the central nervous system, and it's just like it sounds, center, meaning central is the brain and our spinal cord. We all kind of know those ones. Then there's the peripheral nervous system. And when I say the word periphery, what do you think of, Dave?
The edges.
Yeah.
Toward the sides.
Yeah. The peripheral, we say peripheral vision. I mean, we're on video. I can see you, but I can still tell I've got a kitchen over there, a wall over here. So the peripheral nervous system, it comes out of the central nervous system. Yeah. So if you see in your mind's eye that brain and spinal cord, then you've got these nerves that just come out to the periphery. And so those nerves, like I've got a glass of water here. If I was to drink this water, it would go obviously down through my esophagus into my stomach, and I'd get it into my intestines and absorb that all. And if I don't need it, I'm going to make urine and pee it out. So the peripheral nervous system is responsible for those functions. If I was to say to you, clap your hands and give me a thumbs up, like you're having to use your peripheral nervous system via your central nervous system to make that action happen. Make sense so far?
Yeah.
Cool. The other job of the peripheral nervous system is to govern our survival responses. So, if you are doing something and all of a sudden you get scared or something comes at you like a soccer ball and you have to react or jump, and to avoid it, your peripheral nervous system is working via something called the autonomic nervous system. So these are all these branches. And the autonomic nervous system, it is that one that's like danger, danger, get out of the way. Or a simple example, let's say you cut something, and like blood is coming out, artery, like it's a big bleed. The autonomic nervous system will notice that and say, danger, danger, shut the system down. Right? And it's that classic idea, life over limb. And that might make a person go into what we would call a freeze state. So there's fight and flight and then freeze. And freeze preserves, it protects, it can put us into shock. It can also pass us out. Some people, to use the example of blood, they get a little woozy if they see blood and they might just pass out. Overwhelming information. If someone hears something like they've lost a loved one or something really bad, and the information is too much, the system, if the body can't handle that intensity, it'll go into autonomic, hence autonomic nervous system reaction. So this peripheral nervous system, it allows us to move our body, but it also allows us to have these survival mechanisms come in when we need to protect. And it governs that digestion, as I said with my water example, but also, if we have let's say an infection, it'll pump up our fever to fight off the infection, for example. It also governs our heart, right? So if you were to start to do some jumping jacks with me, which we won't do, but if we were to do that, you would want your blood pressure to go up, your heart rate to go up, your breathing to go up to get more oxygen in, or CO2 out, all those things. So nervous system is a big category that is automatic stuff, voluntary stuff like moving, and survival, if I just kind of cut them down into some basic pieces. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah. And then along those lines, back to the cut, we get a cut. It also is painful, right? Because we've hit nerves. And so those nerves, so pleasure, pain, if someone's being nice to some rubbing, if my wife rubs my head,
of course, feels good.
It feels great.
Yeah.
But if I cut my finger while I'm chopping carrots, that hurts.
100%.
And so those are nerve signals.
There's like a pressure. So we're both sitting right now, so you can feel your pelvis on the chair. And that gives us feedback. So that peripheral nervous system is also giving us feedback, same like a hot stove. You put your hand over it. I was at a fire pit the other day, and you can feel how far you can go. It's like, oh, that's too hot. That sensory perception is going in through these nervous systems, and the brain's saying hot, take the hands away. Some people, or not, I shouldn't say this. If you've ever had a dental procedure, like a tooth that has to come out or a cavity, they freeze, the gum and all that to do the surgery or the procedure. And if you try to drink water afterwards or talk, it like the water will fall out of your mouth.
Right.
Or you'll talk kind of funny, sort of if someone has had a stroke, they might not be able to form their words properly, or a neurological condition. That's a sign that the nervous system is not properly firing and it's missing signals.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what problems do people have due to the nervous system?
Oh, so many. So the work that I primarily do is working with folks, and this is not everyone, but generally speaking, chronic illness, chronic anxiety, depression, OCD, behaviors, gut problems, autoimmune problems, social anxiety, trouble sleeping, so many things. And remember how I said that nervous system, it governs our digestion, our cardiovascular. It's also our endocrine system, our immune system. Then remember how I said it also governs our fight, flight, freeze system, right? The protection. We need those fight, flight, freezes, right? You cut yourself, you want your system to go into a bit of shock to take care of that, etc. What happens with us humans, because we have this higher brain, which is very important, which is why we're sitting here with this technology, it can overthink things. And because we have social conditioning and all the things that we've done to domesticate humans away from their natural kind of environment, we get into a bit of a pickle, if I use that word, into a problem pickle, where if we have a threat happen to us or a stress, and then let's just say the threat and stress is gone, or the accident is over, or the person screaming at you is no longer screaming at you, we don't always just release that and dissolve it away. When that occurs, I'm going to be very simple to begin with. When that occurs, the physiology, the biology, the nervous system traps that fight, flight, and freeze. And when that happens, Dave, that autonomic nervous system, which is part of the peripheral, is only looking and focusing at survival. It's looking for, it's like when it's ramped up, when it's still on threshold holding stress, it will not do the jobs of digestion, of immunity, of hormonal balance, of sleep, of wanting to connect, and be with others. It'll have a guard around it, an armor that basically is stay away from me, or it could be the opposite. It can be, I need more, I need more, I need to feel myself. This is where we get into things like addiction, where people are ramped up, for example, and they're looking to soothe the system. They're looking to get out of that stress response. But often they don't realize that that desire to soothe is there because it's a byproduct of the system being trapped in what we would call excess survival stress. I hope I'm making sense there.
You are. And how does cortisol play a role? Because when we talk fight or flight in the health world, oftentimes we talk hormones and cortisol and how in our modern society, adrenaline, how we tend to be too ramped up in that way as well. Is there a relationship between hormones and the nervous system?
Sure. So if we think about, and I'll be very basic, like let's just say a person, I'll use a really specific scenario. So a lot of folks who have autoimmune conditions, chronic illness, chronic fatigue, their cortisol is shot. So and I'm again being very general, but usually they were brought into a world that was very stressful. Parents were stressed. Maybe there was adversity. Maybe in utero, there was a high level of stress. And even transgenerationally, our ancestors, we've seen this through the research post 9/11 and also post World War II with those who survived the concentration camps. There is a way of transferring through the lineage stress response, even if those children were not living in those scary places.
Interesting.
That gets into that vagus nerve, which if we have time, we can touch into that. It has to do with how babies were, how they're raised by their caregivers. So if the caregiver is stressed and they're handling this newborn baby, that baby is going to feel threat. Even though the parent might be treating them totally fine, they'll feel the nervous energy. They'll feel the ramped up stored survival stress in the parent or the grandmother or the nanny, for example. And so that little one is like, danger, danger, danger.
Wow.
Adrenaline goes out because adrenaline is part of our hormones that come out of the kidney, the adrenal glands above the kidneys. But here's what's interesting. Adrenaline is short acting. It only lasts for a little bit, like seconds. And so when there's this constant, hit of stress in your environment, the system goes, well, this isn't very efficient. We need to pump out a stress hormone that's going to last a little longer. And that's where cortisol comes in.
Okay.
And so this steroid hormone, because that's essentially what it is, it comes out and it prepares that system for the stress, for the beating of the heart, the preparation of maybe dying. I'm being a bit extreme, but that's all that, let's say, that little infant knows. Once that occurs, the system will start to break down because cortisol is actually it's fast, it's long acting, it's a steroid, and it impacts the tissues, it impacts the cells. We know it impacts the part of the brain responsible for memory called the hippocampus, all these sorts of things. And so it gets into the cellular structure and it breaks it down. And so one thing you'll often hear, because we need cortisol, we need it to fluctuate during the day so that we wake up in the morning and then it goes down so we go to sleep at night. Often with folks with high levels of survival stress, let's just say from their beginning years as babies, they will have the flip where they are so tired in the day. And then as the sun goes down, they get awake and they can't sleep. And then they're just, insomniacs. And that shows that the system is what we would call dysregulated. So there's a dysregulation of that nervous system, all of the nervous systems, as opposed to what we want, which is regulation, which is nice, smooth, homeostatic flow, where a stress comes in, we get a little scared, we get a little worried, we might cry a bit, we might, the pain of the cut, but then we regroup, we feel our bodies, we do what we need to do, and we come out of it. a lot of the folks who are struggling with stored survival stress, many of them never knew what that was even like as infants. They were brought into a world of just this chronic cortisol, the adrenals are just pumping. And then because we do need cortisol, because it does help with inflammation, when it's gone, the system goes into what we would call an inflammatory reaction. And that's why a lot of these troubles are, it's a Band-Aid, but a person will be given a corticosteroid, like prednisone, for example, is a common drug given to someone who's having a flare of, say, rheumatoid arthritis or something where there's inflammation in the body. And while that might be helpful short term, it's not addressing that kind of root cause of why is the system not creating its own cortisol to keep the inflammation in that kind of good level.
It's interesting when you talk about our bodies storing this up. It reminds me of the emotion code theory,
Sure.
which is similar. And they don't talk so much about the nervous system there. They talk more about emotions and how, but the two are very interrelated. I mean, when we experience stress, there's emotions around that. Is it the same thing, or is it slightly different? Or
yeah, I haven't studied the emotion code, but I know of it. So I'll speak to what I know about emotions, and then a person can compare and contrast. But one thing that is really interesting is our emotions are actually stored in our body, in our viscera, in our tissues. Now, this is a leap because it's not something that's common knowledge. We think of when we think of emotions, we think in the head. We're thinking about them. We're processing them in our brain. But the dead giveaway, Dave, when I was in private practice and I'd be working with someone and I'd say, so what are you noticing? And they might say, well, I'm feeling really sad. And I said, well, where do you feel that sadness? And then their eyes kind of go up into their brain and they think about it. But if you've ever been with a kid or someone who's really in tune with their body, the sadness is in the body. It's like my heart hurts, my gut hurts, I have butterflies, my heart, and just everything is just freaking out, or it's really depressed. And so from my learnings and my studies with my mentors, when we see the emotions is in our body and primarily in the sensations, when we can track the sensations, we can actually get under a lot of the emotions that paralyze a lot of people, right? And a lot of the common kind of old school talk therapies, while good in some respects, they're only trying to think a person out, when really we have to dive into this physiology and get to know, oh, that's a fight response, that's a flight response. Oh, I didn't realize I was numbing out and shutting down every time I was stressed. I just thought I felt zen. And that zen is actually a shutdown response.
it's really interesting as you talk about this. I was at a meditation retreat once. We had a day of silence, and it was called Soul Day. Okay.
Sure.
And during this time, we did a personal experiment.
Yep.
Where the facilitator had us bring up a really positive memory. And sitting, and this took hours. I'm going to describe something that took hours, but what they did is they walked us through where they really had us relive this experience and really feel it and go through this process. And going through that process, it was, as you said, as they really kind of said, where are you feeling it? Where are you experiencing it? Over time, I realized that as I brought back this memory of this joyous, state, I was feeling it in my chest. And then they're doing little experiments like, well, is it hot?
Yeah.
Is it warm?
Yeah.
Is it big? Is it small? Is it whatever?
Colors,
and then all these words, colors, whatever.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to do. And then they had us do a negative experience and go through the same thing.
Yep.
And amazingly, by the time you're done, what you find out is that both experiences feel almost exactly the same or in the same place. And you have this huge, like,
you betcha.
Yeah, you're familiar. I see you're nodding your head and smiling. You totally get this.
Yeah. And that's like the holy grail of solving and healing and providing what I like to call our own medicine, because, and I'm all for certain medicines, you know, like if you need antibiotics because you have an infection, go ahead and take them. But there is so much natural medicine in our physiology, in our organs, in our tissues. I'm very explicit when I say that, because a lot of people, we kind of throw out this, oh yeah, I'm doing mind body work. I'm doing mind body work. So it's all in the heart. It's all in the throat chakra, whatever. And I believe in those chakras and energy centers, fine. And when you look at those centers, it's actually where a lot of the glands are, right? The thyroid is at the throat, the pineal and hypothalamus and pituitary is here. Like they actually line up. The East and the West traditions come together really nicely when you're open to seeing them together and connected. And when you ask someone who's been through severe trauma, you know, and I've worked with folks who have had things happen to them that you don't even want to think about because they're so gruesome. And they've been through, you know, the cycle. I mean, I think you're in the United States, so you have the VA, for example, you know, for veterans and folks who have survived and served. And so many of their troubles, it's complex PTSD and PTSD from being in a war zone or seeing terrible things happen. And what occurs in those zones is the body is faced with so much overwhelming stuff that it can't process it fast enough. And part of the work, very similar to what you did in that meditation retreat, is getting into the body, but also slowing it down, so much so that you can take little sips of the experience, right? It's like the difference between sipping a glass of wine really slowly and feeling like the smell, and you see the swirl. I love wine, so I think about that. And but you don't just take it, and I would hope not, and just drink the whole thing like you're thirsty for water, right? And so one of the ways to really work with intense old traumatic experiences is to get into the body in a slow way and really respect that, let's say 10 years ago, 30 years ago, and for some people, you know, some of my students are 80 plus, it doesn't matter the age, if that experience got trapped in your nervous system, and again, if I go back to my first example, all the muscles, all the organs, the way the heart rate raises and falls, all of that will trap that traumatic, scary experience. And so then to heal it, we want to reverse engineer in a sense and be like, okay, well, can you at least feel your feet on the ground? It's like, yeah, I can. Oh, and then the flashback might come to being in that war zone or in that abusive household. It's like, well, what is it like outside of the home when you imagine yourself sitting there and just seeing it? And for some people, being outside of the home or being like in the next town and imagining them, like this is all make believe, and seeing that abusive place from far away is enough of a stressor. And then you have them do something similar to what you would have done in that meditation retreat.
Oh, so this is the type of work you do?
Yes.
Describe a session. Obviously, we're not going to detail on individual or
sure,
but describe your work. How do you do it?
It will be very different depending on the person. I don't have private practice now. Now everything is online, so I teach people in groups to do the tracking of their system. We never, in my group, and I'll talk about how you would do it personally, but in a group, I'm not asking people to tell me their traumas ever. I'm teaching them how to understand the language of their physiology, of their nervous system. We do a lot of education, like way more than what we just talked about the nervous system branches. Really building up foundation, almost the same way, Dave, you would with a child, a baby that's born into the world. And as a parent, you have to teach it everything. Like you have to soothe it when it's crying, feed when hungry, all those things. And then as they get more dexterous, you have to give them things to play with. And so essentially part of my work is reteaching, or for some, teaching them for the first time how to be in their body and then build from there. So that would be sort of the group side of my work. If I was, say, doing a private session with someone, it really comes down to them walking in the door, or if it's on Zoom, just starting a conversation. Hey, how's it going? And what they say will then determine where we go. I might talk a little bit because I can tell that they're really nervous, and we might just, shoot the breeze and talk about the weather. As silly as that might sound, it helps someone feel seen.
Yeah.
And it brings them down. If you ever meet someone nervous in an elevator, or it's like, what do you all? Oh, great weather, or oh, that rain is terrible,
Yeah.
right?
You're reminding me of Ted Lasso right now. Did you watch Ted Lasso?
No, a
The
friend of
show
mine said
that
it was
won.
hilarious.
Oh my gosh, I'm addicted. It's my
Okay,
guilty pleasure
that's
because
good.
it's a little off, but
That's
but I gotta
okay.
say I love it. And there's a scene in there. I don't want to do any spoilers here, but there's
Sure.
a scene in there where a coach finally gives in. They've got this great performance psychologist who's helping the
Mm-hmm.
team, and finally the coach gets brave enough to go see a psychologist, which in his background is just something you just never do.
Never
A
do.
Midwestern person who totally mistrusts anyone who's gonna, do that type of work. And it's a hilarious montage of him going in the office, talk, and leave, and this back and forth of, I assume, over weeks before he
Mm-hmm.
actually has a meaningful conversation. And it's
Yep.
an interesting scene
That's
as you
great.
see him working through his personal stuff just to be able to sit and chat with a therapist.
Well, what you just said there, I love how a lot of these shows are actually bringing that stuff in, because it's showing that we are starting to accept that you can't just throw somebody into the fire. Like, exposure therapy is actually kind of old school, where you just expose someone to their trauma and just like white knuckle it, right?
Right.
But what you just described there, that's like relational trauma. That's somewhere along the line that individual was not comfortable communicating with someone, probably due to shame, or their parents not treating them well, or seeing something terrible. And actually, I was on another great show. Have you ever seen Sex Education?
No.
Oh my gosh,
It's
so
on
fun.
Netflix right now, I think.
Yes, you have to watch it.
Okay.
It is the epitome of teenagers in school and all the things that happen. But there was this one character who was so socially awkward, and he realized he had to talk. He had to have his back to the teacher. He couldn't face the teacher head on.
Wow.
And that started to open him up. And I'm like, that's brilliant that they've actually put that in there. Because if I had a client come in, or let's say I have a Zoom person, and I can tell that they're going into a bit of a shutdown because their eyes are glazing over, or they're getting a little hot, I would be like, what would it be like to just turn off our cameras? Or what would it be like for me to just turn and not look at you, and you take me in, and that's all. And I won't stare and watch you. And so that then might precede us to the next thing, which is, okay, well, now that you're feeling a little more settled, what are you sensing in your body? Or maybe they have a memory that they want to work with, and I might not let them dive into it. I might say, okay, so that accident happened when you were 10. What was going on when you were 10? Like, what were your parents doing? So we would work around the event so that we're kind of easing into it, but also feeling the somatic body as they get closer to that event. Or for some folks, let's say there was a bad accident and they're fine because they're obviously there. I might actually get them to feel the relief of, oh my gosh, I can now use my legs. I didn't think I was going to be able to use them. And I might say, well, let's start after the accident and facilitate a foundation of ease, of you're actually okay. And one of the more powerful things, Dave, to get a person to say if they have been in a really bad abuse, a war zone, an accident, or just a shitty, stressful life for a long time, is to get them to say the words, or they'll hear me say them, which is, I'm alive, I survived, and I'm here. I'm alive, I survived, and I'm here. And the reason why those can be so powerful, and some of people listening to this might get shivers just as they hear that, is they've never dropped into that, oh my gosh, I actually am alive, because their physiology still thinks that they're almost dying in that accident, or in that stress, or in that schoolroom where they're being bullied. It doesn't have to be a big, bad, like limb busting accident. It can be being screamed at by your mother every day, for example.
Those words you just said
Yeah.
are almost exactly like Thich Nhat Hanh's, I have arrived, I am home, in the
I'm here.
here, in the now, I'm solid, I am
I'm
free,
strong. Yeah.
in the ultimate I dwell, right? Those beautiful Zen poems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It feels the same.
Yeah.
That concept is grounding of coming back from wherever your mind took you to where you are again, right? I am in desperate need of this all the time. Like, I totally get
Okay.
it. Like, this is why I meditate. And it's why I go to retreats, because I'm a type A personality,
Mm-hmm.
and my tendency, if I'm not careful, is to constantly be thinking about something in the past or something in the future or something to worry about. And I actually have to train it every single day. I have to remind myself, come back to the now. And I'm probably not unique, right? Probably just part of the
You're the
human
only one,
condition.
Dave. You're the only one.
Yeah, I'm sure it's just part of being human, that it's just kind of how our minds work. And we need to be proactive
Mm-hmm.
in,
And I'd
in
love
this area.
to say something to that, if I can, is because we have this higher cortex that is super strong, it's bigger and more powerful than any computer we could possibly imagine. And I say that with full conviction. I'm sure some
Yeah.
computer scientists might, I'm like, you have, like, if you can walk down some stairs not seeing and trip and catch yourself and have a glass of water in your hand and not have it spill while noticing the things around you, that is a very, very strong system.
Yeah.
Right?
Show us any other thing on the planet that can do
That
that.
can do that.
There's no such thing.
They can't figure it out because it's this. And so what you just said is really important, because we do need to do the meditation, the mind body work, the nervous system work, which is what I teach, but we also have to bring the brain and the thinking into it. And so those words that I just said are very powerful when we blend it in with seeing where we are in our space. Feeling our pelvis on the chair, our feet on the ground, because it can just be, yeah, I'm alive, I'm here, I survived, right? And it's just a nice thing to say. But when we combine all these pieces together, that's when, like, the fizzle, like the magic starts to fizz and come together, in a sense. The sparks start to happen.
Okay, so on that
Yes.
point, give some practical practices or ideas or takeaways for people listening. And let's do this in two parts. Let's just, there's thousands of people who are going to hear this interview. And let's talk first to those that probably just going to listen, get a few good ideas from this podcast and move along. And then we'll talk about other people that are thinking, oh man, no, I want to connect with her. What's the next step? So let's start with the first group, people who are listening to the podcast, and you want to give them a few great takeaways from your experience that they can apply in a practical way in their life.
So I'll be really basic. The next time you hurt yourself, maybe it's something as small as burning your finger on the toaster, right? Or stubbing your toe on the coffee table. I hit my thumb the other day on my spin bike trying to move it, and it really hurt.
Right.
And even me, with all of my experience, I found myself picking up my phone as I started to spin and checking my messages. And I had to catch myself because I could feel I was starting to negate the throbbing. And I was like, put it down, Irene, feel your thumb. And it was like, I'm like, did I break that? And I didn't. There's a little bruise, and I just kept spinning. I didn't stop my workout, but I just held my hand, and I didn't pretend it wasn't there. I didn't baby it. I didn't stop. I just felt the sensation. I felt there was no emotion really at all. It was just, ouch, that really hurt. So whenever, from this day forward, everybody, put their hands up and pledge to this. You can if you can pause. Maybe you're still doing something, but notice the sensations, notice the feeling. And to go further than that, one of the ways to actually get into our nervous system and work with it, and this is going to sound really crazy, Dave, but Notice how many times a day you might avoid going to the bathroom because you're too busy. You feel the pressure in your bladder. You feel that bowels are doing its thing, and you're like, nope, I'm just going to hold it in and keep doing more.
Powering through.
I'm thirsty. Okay, I won't go. I'm going to finish this email, and I'm not going to go get that glass of water. I'm tired. I'm going to hit myself with another, sugar dose. And I'm not against sugar or coffee. Like, do it if you need to, but be aware of these internal biological needs. And the reason I say that is when you have a brand new baby, the way that you teach them how to be with their nervous system and regulate is when they're hungry, you feed them. When they're wet with their diaper, you change them. When they need burping, you help them, you soften. When they're happy, you play with them, right? When they're tired, as a parent, you know the different sounds. So when you didn't get that growing up, we have less of an ability to tune in, and it's the real word is attuned to our own bodies. So a person can do a lot of good healing work just by getting that stuff in their awareness. And people will be surprised, because I've worked with thousands of people, how often you override your physiological needs. Even tears, right? I cry at commercials. I don't have TV, but you see some of the commercials, and or like documentaries I can bawl at. And are you sitting there in the comfort of your own home and you're holding in the tears, right? Those are such perfect opportunities to practice letting emotions move through, because we know that when we hold emotions in, it makes us sick. And also anger, that's another one. And anger is not the same as rage and violence and hurting others or ourselves. But if we have a big, I'm so pissed off at what just happened, like, don't pretend it's not in there. Like, pound your fists, stomp your feet a bit, growl a little bit like an animal would, because we still have that mammalian body. And we know there's research, stored anger can lead to a lot of autoimmune illness and cancer. And so it's very important to get into that biology. So that's something everyone can do.
Okay. So mindfulness, be with what is, sit with it. Don't try
Express. Yeah.
I'll tell you one of my biggest pet peeves as a grandparent.
Please.
If one of my grandkids falls down and the parent picks him up and says something like, "You're okay," it drives me nuts.
I have a video just on that. I'll share it with you. Because
Please
you're right.
do.
You're
Please
right.
do.
The moment you do that, you are not acknowledging and letting them feel the pain. It doesn't mean that they're going to be weak if they cry a little bit, right?
As a matter of fact, I mean, I've done I've done my own little case studies, right? This whole them trying to tell them to deny their feelings, the crying can go on for minutes. Whereas if you pick up the child and hold them, say little things like, "Oh, that looked like it hurt. Where did it hurt? Where did you land? Was the road sharp on your hands?" And I just ask questions. And it takes about 30 seconds.
You connect with them.
I connect with them and they connect with how they're feeling.
Exactly.
And instead of the reverse. So we're not trying to get them to feel something else or distract them. We're literally walking them through what they just experienced. And it takes them about 30 seconds of being with what happened, and they're off your lap and away they go to play again with a little bruise on their knee.
And that stress response comes down, like what I was saying a second ago. But if that doesn't happen, that connection, they're going to stay stressed. And then later, when you're having dinner, that's the explosion. That's I don't want to eat that. I don't want to go to my room. Right.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So, and I'm sorry, I've kept you over time here. So let's move on to, you said you're not doing private coaching anymore, but you're doing group sessions.
Yes.
So talk about that.
Yeah. Everything, 2 courses, online courses. And basically I call them becoming an apprentice of your system, of your nervous system. So, the way they work is you learn like hardcore theory in a fun way, of course, slides, visuals. I teach, I talk, I give examples, vignettes. I use my own stories. And then the practices, Dave, are literally coming back to the body and working with very gentle movement, getting the eyes to reorient to the environment. It's very neurological, but really basic, but potent. Touch that is directed to these visceral areas of the body. We call them diaphragms and joints, because every joint in our body holds affect and emotion, believe it or not.
Okay.
And the fascia holds this stuff. Posture, if you've ever met someone who is struggling with a lot of depression and deep, deep shame, they're very usually sunken, and their spines are usually either collapsed and have no energy or very rigid. And so because of the background in my movement science, and then of course the background in the nervous system work, I've kind of blended these things together into what I call neurosensory exercises. But it's not like bicep lifting exercise. It's very gentle. And so, these two programs, one is called Smart Body, Smart Mind. We run that once a year. It's 12 weeks, but it's also a lifetime. It's not something that you just stop at 12 weeks. You become skilled at knowing how to listen to your system. And you also become skilled at knowing how to see the environment around you. And what a lot of my students will say, in addition to getting better from chronic illnesses that have been deemed genetic and never able to change, is they're like, wow, I have way more compassion for the world right now. I have way more compassion for these people that are harming the environment and people. It doesn't mean that it's right, but we start to see everything through this nervous system lens. Because when we're really connected to the body and we're really feeling our body, we have true empathy for everything around us. You can only hurt something else if you're disconnected from your body, right? You can't stomach doing things like that are terrible if you're feeling yourself. It's being done out of survival. And so to go back to the programs, they're teaching a person how to become an apprentice of their system, how to become their own medicine. And then I've got a smaller course that's kind of a lead in to that longer course called the 21-day nervous system tune-up. So, and then I've got tons of videos and downloads, and I think I've got 300 YouTube videos up there on my channel and Instagram, so and all that stuff.
Where do people find you?
Yeah, just my name, Irene Lyon with a Y, no S. That's my site, and from there, all the social feeds are there, all my ebooks and downloads, my monthly classes, lectures, just my bio. You can look at my credentials. Everything is there.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Irene, it's been really fun to talk to you. There's some really interesting ideas here, and what you're doing for a living is absolutely fascinating to me.
I like my job. It's a good job.
I'll bet you do. I bet you have a lot of satisfaction as you work with people that come to you with trauma and a variety of issues, and then you help them work through that. It's got to be really gratifying.
It's interesting you say that. It's gratifying, and I find that I'm not attached to it in an interesting way, because I kind of feel like a bit of an enzyme or a catalyst. It's like I'm giving the information, I'm helping the process, and everyone's different. It's up to the person. Like the person has to do the work. I can't do it for them. I don't like to call myself a healer. People call me that. I hate it. It's like you're healing yourself. And I'm providing you with what your system knows how to do, but it's maybe never done it before because of your upbringing and our crazy environment, right? Yeah. So, and the one thing I'll say, maybe it's the final thing, is I have found that the more resilient and regulated we are at this level, this specific nervous system level, the more we can handle the world and the uncertainty and the ever-changing nature that we can't predict. My students have really said, if it wasn't for this work over the past 2 years, I'd be screwed. And there is some research coming out from some of my mentors who are older than me at universities, who are seeing that those who have done better, who have had less mental health problems, were those that had worked with their systems or came from less adversity. So it doesn't mean that you can't heal the system when you had adversity, but you have to actively work to restoring that regulation to all those nervous systems that I mentioned at the top of our chat.
Okay, well, Irene,
Yeah.
thank you so much. For those of you that are watching this on video format, you can see Irene's name right there. Just add a .com to the end, and that's how you find more about her. And for those of you listening, IreneLyon.com, Lyon with a Y. Irene from beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. Thank you so much for being on the show.
You're welcome, Dave. Good to meet you. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you. And for those of you listening, this is Dave Sherwin wishing you health and success.